My phone vibrated during a work meeting. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. I answered, my heart racing, and on the other end, the serious voice of my daughter Sophie's school principal. He urged me to come as soon as possible, saying simply, "It's urgent." My mind was filled with 1,000 thoughts, all of them bad. School had always been peaceful. Sophie, just 9 years old, was a sweet, creative, and somewhat shy girl. She enjoyed drawing, writing, and observing more than talking. But in the last few months, I'd noticed something different about her. Blank stares, questions about why people lie, and an awkward silence after class. Still, I never thought the situation was so serious. After hanging up, I tried to call my mother to let her know I was leaving work, but she barely heard me. "Come on, you're exaggerating. She must have just had a disagreement with someone." That sentence bothered me more than I could admit. Ever since I separated from Sophie's father, my parents thought I was too sensitive, but something in the director's tone said otherwise. I grabbed my things, ran out, and drove to school, my palms sweating on the steering wheel. I kept repeating aloud to myself, "Calm down. Maybe it's nothing." But my heart told me otherwise. With each stoplight, the tension grew. When I arrived, the receptionist gave me a look that only confirmed what I feared. This was no ordinary visit. I was taken directly to the principal's office. The principal, a serious man, greeted me with a heavy look, as if carrying something difficult to say. I sat across from him and asked, almost inaudibly, what happened to my daughter? He took a deep breath, folded his hands on the table, and said, "It's about some things Sophie has been drawing, and what she told the teacher yesterday. But before I continue, please, share this story to reach further, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment." The principal opened a folder. Inside were copies of Sophie's drawings. They didn't look like the drawings of a happy child. There were sad figures, people crying, and in almost all of them, a dark corner of the page with someone huddled. In one of them, there was even a figure of a woman screaming, with a shadow behind her. He handed me one of the papers and said, "Your daughter wrote on the back, 'I wanted you to believe me.'" My stomach churned. I'd never seen these drawings at home. Sophie always only showed hearts, little houses, or her cat. But there was her pain, imprinted on the paper. The principal explained that the art teacher had noticed something was wrong for weeks, but had only been able to truly talk to Sophie the day before, and what she told her was too much to ignore. According to Sophie, there was someone at school who made her feel very uncomfortable, someone who said strange things, touched her in ways she didn't like, and threatened her not to tell anyone. When her teacher asked why she didn't tell anyone sooner, Sophie replied, "I tried, but no one listens. My grandmother says I make things up." At that moment, everything inside me froze. Guilt came like a tsunami. How had I not noticed? How had I let my daughter be silenced by so many adults around her, including myself? The principal looked at me and said, "She's in the nurse's office. She's scared but relieved to finally be heard." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm, but the pain inside me exploded. I got up from my chair, my legs feeling weak. Before leaving the room, the principal said to me, "We'll need to investigate this. We've already called the psychologist, and we'll contact the school's legal guardians. But most of all, she needs you now." I simply nodded, my eyes brimming with tears. I had been called. Now it was my time to listen. For real. I entered the ward with a heavy heart. Sophie was sitting on a stretcher, hugging her old teddy bear, the same one she'd carried since she was 3. She looked at me, her eyes red but dry, as if she'd cried her eyes out. When she saw me, she didn't run to hug me. She just stared at me, waiting for something I hadn't yet given her. Trust. I approached slowly, knelt beside the bed, and touched her hand. "You're safe now, okay?" She took a deep breath and whispered, "Do you believe me, Mommy?" It broke me inside. It was like each word was a knife cutting through my own shame. I cupped her face in my hands and said, "I believe anything you tell me." Sophie then began to tell me in more detail. The things that employee did, the whispered words in the hallway, the touches disguised as help, and the constant manipulation. She said she tried to tell Grandma once, but she dismissed it as childish drama. She tried to draw for me, but I was always in a hurry. So I kept quiet, Mommy, but I was scared. As she spoke, I felt anger and pain at the same time. Anger at whoever hurt my daughter. Anger at myself for not seeing it sooner. As a mother, we believe we can protect our children from everything. until the moment reality shows us we've failed. But there, in front of her, it wasn't time to blame myself. It was time to stand up and do what I should have done all along. The school psychologist came in and sat down with us. She explained that Sophie now needed professional support, and more than ever, an environment where she felt heard. She reinforced that Sophie's story was serious and that it had already been formally reported to the appropriate authorities. It was the beginning of a battle, but now at least, my daughter was no longer alone. That same day, I took Sophie home. On the way, I called my mother. I needed to talk to her. I needed to understand why she'd said that. When we arrived, my mother was waiting for us at the door. She gave me a forced smile and said, "See, I told you it was all in her head." Sophie lowered her head, squeezed my hand, and went in without looking back. I left Sophie in her room and went back to confront my parents. I asked why they didn't believe her. My mother replied in that tone only she possesses, because kids these days make up so many things. My father crossed his arms and said, "You've always been an exaggerator, and now you're raising a daughter the same way." That hurt me more than I could describe. They had no idea how much damage it had done. I took a deep breath to keep from exploding, but then I said firmly, "She was being harassed at school, and you said it was an exaggeration." For the first time, I felt a heavy silence fall over the room. My mother stammered, "But, what do you mean?" I simply replied, "Because you were too busy thinking about what you thought was true instead of listening." Their reaction was a mixture of denial and discomfort. There was no apology. There was no hug. Just a look away, as if they'd rather run from guilt than face it. And in that moment, I realized that maybe my daughter hadn't been the only one ignored in that house for years. It was a cycle, and now, someone needed to break it. I returned to the room and found Sophie sleeping, hugging her bear. I sat beside her and watched for a while. In that silence, I made an internal decision. From now on, no one would silence my daughter. Not teachers, not classmates, not grandparents. It was time to protect her, for real. It was time to fight. The next day, I got up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't even fully risen, but my head was already racing. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and, cell phone in hand, began searching for lawyers specializing in school and child psychology cases. I wasn't going to wait any longer. I needed someone to fight with us, because I wasn't going to let this case be hushed up. I contacted a lawyer recommended by a friend. When I explained the situation, she was silent for a few seconds and then said, "You need to come in today. This can't wait." I scheduled the appointment and called work to excuse myself. For the first time, I felt like I was doing exactly what needed to be done. It was as if, after so long, I had regained my voice as a mother. Before leaving, I sat down with Sophie and explained what was going to happen. I told her that Mom was now listening with both ears and her whole heart. She looked at me with a certain relief. "I thought no one would ever believe me," she said. "Now you will," I replied, "and you'll see that your courage will help many other children." She just smiled shyly, but I saw the sparkle return to her eyes. In the meeting with the lawyer, I heard some harsh truths. Many of these cases are swept under the rug, but you have evidence, reports, drawings, and the school's support. That's important, but you need to be prepared. This fight isn't easy. I looked at her and said, "There's nothing heavier than watching my daughter suffer and doing nothing. Let's move on." I left with the paperwork ready to contact the school's legal guardians and, if necessary, take criminal action. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted to ensure that that man, that disgusting employee, never came near a child again. And I wanted my daughter to know that her mother would fight until the end. The following week, the school administration called an extraordinary meeting with parents. I went, my heart heavy, but my head held high. The principal explained that they were taking legal action against an employee, whose name, for legal reasons, would not be revealed. He said the complaint had come from a brave student, my Sophie, and in that moment, I knew the silence was about to end. Some parents started whispering. Others started sending messages in the school's WhatsApp groups. Rumors began to surface, even people saying Sophie was making it up for attention. That's when I understood the true face of fear, the doubt planted by others. But I was ready to face it. I took the microphone and spoke in front of everyone. My daughter doesn't lie, and I have proof. My speech was direct, without tears, but with a firm voice. I recounted without over-explaining what Sophie had been through. I showed the drawings, and then I concluded with a sentence that silenced the room. If this were your daughter, you would want to be heard. A hush fell over the auditorium. I handed the microphone back and left, feeling that even though I was afraid, I was doing the right thing. In the following days, the school removed the employee. The police were called. Psychologists began offering free support to other children, and that's when something unexpected happened. Other girls began speaking out, one by one, telling similar stories. Sophie wasn't the only one. And what hurt me most, and gave me strength, was knowing that she was the first to have the courage to break the cycle. The whole town started talking. Some tried to protect the attacker, saying he was always so kind. But many began to thank us for our courage. Mothers called me to say, "Now I can see my son better." The case became a topic on local radio, social media, and even a town blog. And it all started with a child who just wanted to be heard. After the story spread, the hardest part came: the attacks. People who didn't even know Sophie began to doubt her. They said it was all fabrication, exaggeration, and that we were destroying the life of a good employee. I had to read cruel comments on social media, some even suggesting I was using my daughter for publicity. It was cruel, unfair, and disgusting. At the school gates, mothers gave me dirty looks. Some stopped letting their children play with Sophie, as if she'd done something wrong. I couldn't believe people's fear was greater than their love for their own children. Meanwhile, Sophie returned home quieter, more insecure. It was as if her courage had become a punishment. I called her over to talk. I said, "Daughter, you didn't do anything wrong. You did the right thing, but not everyone can handle the truth." She looked at me and asked, "Why do they think I lied?" And I replied, trying to hold back tears, "Because it's easier to pretend it didn't happen than to accept that someone could have done this to a child." She just nodded sadly. We decided to change our routine. I took Sophie to a different school day for a while. We also started therapy together, mother and daughter. There, we talked about fear, pain, but also strength. The psychologist told us, traumas become roots. Either you water them with silence, or you prune them with truth. That stuck in my mind like a mantra. I was pruning, even though it hurt. But even with all this, there was a moment when I almost gave up. One morning, I found an anonymous note pinned to my gate saying, "End this. Your daughter will grow up hating you for all this." It took my breath away. I stood there motionless for minutes. Then I went inside, hugged my still sleeping daughter, and silently swore, "Never. I will never back down." It was in this tense moment that something changed. I started receiving private messages from women in the city. Some said, "I went through this when I was a child, but no one believed me." Others, "My daughter told me something similar, and now I understand better." It was as if Sophie's story had broken a dam of silence, and I realized we were no longer alone. I created an online group for mothers who wanted to talk about this. Within a week, we had over 200 members. Stories, fears, guilt, everything was shared there. And above all, there was empathy. For the first time, I felt something good was being born from our pain. Sophie, even without knowing it, was becoming a symbol of something bigger. She was just a girl, but she had become the voice of many. I showed this to her one day. I showed her a message from a mother thanking me for saving her daughter from silence. Sophie was silent for a moment, then said, "So, maybe it was worth it." I held her hand, tears in my eyes, and replied, "It was worth it, daughter, and it will continue to be worth it." It was the first time she had truly smiled since the beginning of it all. The school, in turn, changed. They created a new reporting protocol. They trained teachers, installed more cameras, and replaced some of the staff. The principal called me back and thanked me. He said Sophie taught everyone a lesson the school should have learned on its own. His eyes were welling up, and for the first time, I saw there not a principal, but a human being touched by a child. On the way home, Sophie asked me, "Mommy, can I draw about this now?" I said sure, and she drew a picture of a girl on a stage, speaking to a bunch of other children in the dark. In the picture, the girl was holding a flashlight. Sophie pointed and said, "That's me." And in that moment, I knew for sure my daughter was finding her light again. 2 months later, I received a notice from the police station. The accused would be summoned to testify officially. His name was finally revealed to me. He was the school janitor, a man in his late 50s, always smiling, who greeted everyone with a friendly smile. I felt nauseous. I remembered all the times I'd walked past him without suspecting a thing. My blood ran cold. The lawyer advised me to appear, even though I didn't have to testify yet. I arrived early, with a queasy stomach, and waited. When he arrived, I recognized that look. He seemed calm, too calm, like someone who knows he's going to get away with it, like someone who's seen this go down the drain before. That's when I realized how blind the system still was, and how much more alert I needed to be. He denied everything. He said it was just affection, that he never hurt anyone, that girl is making things up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the entire room apart, but I controlled myself. I looked into his eyes, and it was like looking into an endless hole, the kind of coldness that isn't scary. It's disgusting. The police chief conducted the testimony firmly, but I knew it was going to be a battle to prove everything. I walked home in silence. Sophie was waiting for me with a little note on the table. "You're my hero." I cried right there, alone, unable to contain the mixture of anger, sadness, and strength. Her hero needed to be strong, and even though I was broken inside, I held my head high on the outside. I called the lawyer and asked, "What's next?" She replied, "Now it's time to gather everything. Evidence, testimonies, reports, and face the hearing." That was it. I had walked into a minefield, but it was for her, for me, for everyone. And that day, when I lay down next to my daughter and watched her sleep peacefully, I realized I might even be scared to death. But courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is actually going through with it. The day of the hearing arrived. We woke early and dressed in silence. Sophie stayed home with my sister, and I went with the lawyer to the courthouse. I was shaking inside, but I took a deep breath. The courtroom was cold, smelling of old paper and stale coffee. Inside, I saw familiar faces from school, from the city, and I saw him, once again, with that same blank look. The judge opened the session. The prosecution presented Sophie's accounts, the drawings, and the testimonies of the art teacher and the psychologist. Everything was read carefully and carefully. The defendant, once again, denied it. He said he was the target of mass hysteria, that this child was manipulated by her mother. I closed my eyes at that moment. I held on to the table to keep from getting up and screaming. But then, an unexpected witness took the floor, the daughter of a school employee. She said she'd been through something similar years before and never had the courage to speak out, and that seeing Sophie tell the truth had given her strength too. It was an emotional punch to everyone's chest. Even the judge seemed shaken. The defendant began to sweat, for the first time in the entire journey. The hearing was adjourned for the judge's consideration. As we left the room, several parents came up to me. Some apologized. Others just wept silently. I held on tight. I wasn't going to break now. We'd already been through the fire, and now, all that was left was to wait for the sentence. But inside me, something had already changed. The certainty that we'd done everything right. On the way home, I got a call. It was Sophie's teacher. She said, "Today, a new girl brought me a drawing. It was a child in a cape, flying. And it said, 'I am like Sophie.' I couldn't answer. I just cried. My daughter wasn't just my daughter. She was now, the beginning of a change that no one could erase." 2 months after the hearing, the phone rang. It was the lawyer. On the other end, she spoke in a firm but emotional voice. "The verdict has been handed down." My heart stopped for a second. I gripped the phone tightly. I paced the room in circles, as if that would change what she was about to say. And then, I heard, "Guilty, convicted, on all counts." I sat on the couch, unable to process. The words echoed inside me. Guilty. He was found guilty. That man, who for months had robbed me of sleep and destroyed my daughter's peace, would finally get what he deserved. Justice didn't erase the trauma, but it was the beginning of the end of a nightmare. I began to cry, but this time, they were tears of relief. Sophie entered the room just in time. She saw my wet face and ran to me. "Did something happen?" I cupped her face in my hands and said, "Yes, it did, daughter. You won." She looked at me, confused, and then smiled. That smile. It was the same smile she'd had when she was younger, and thought the world was a safe place. And maybe now, it could be again. In the following days, many people came to talk to me. Some I had never seen before. They said, "Thank you. You were strong. Your daughter saved other children." But I knew the true strength wasn't just in me. It was in that little girl, who, even though she was afraid, chose to speak out. And it was in all the ones who came after her. The school issued a public statement. It took responsibility for not noticing sooner, formally apologized, and promised new child safety policies. Sophie's case became a symbol of a new protocol, which would be used as a model for other institutions. My daughter, at 9 years old, had unintentionally changed the system. With the sentence handed down and routine slowly returning to normal, Sophie and I began rebuilding our lives. We went traveling, just the two of us, to a simple place, a small town, full of trees and silence. There, far from everything, she slept better. She drew every day. She asked me questions like, "Do you think one day people will always believe in children?" And I would answer, "We're working towards that." Every day, a little piece of her returned. She laughed more, played more, even wanted to go back to school theater. She said she wanted to play a heroine. I smiled, because the truth is, she already was one. We began to have more open conversations, without fear, without secrets. The pain was still there, but now with a name, a story told, and room to heal. One day at bedtime, she asked me, "Mommy, tell me again how we defeated that monster." And I did, not with anger, but with pride, because turning pain into a story is a way to win too. Sophie listened as if it were a fairy tale, but this tale she knew was real, and in the end, she was the one who won, without a magic wand, only with truth. Upon returning from the trip, we organized a box. In it, we placed all her drawings, the ones that hurt and the ones that healed. It was the therapist's idea, keep, but don't hide, and that became our ritual. Every week, she would draw a new picture of her story, and so, a narrative of pain became a collection of strength, each line a step forward. She said to me one day, looking me in the eye, "Thank you for believing," and I said, "Thank you for teaching me to listen." Because in the end, this story isn't just about abuse, pain, and justice. It's about listening, about trusting our children, about not ignoring the signs. It's about a mother's love and a daughter's courage, and about how the two of them together broke the silence. Months passed. My routine returned, but it was never the same. I saw the world differently now. Where there had been haste before, there was now listening. Where there had been, "We'll talk later," there was now time. I learned that listening to a child can change everything, and that a simple phrase like, "I believe in you," has more power than any judgment. Sophie was growing, and so was I. She began to express herself more, to trust herself more. There were days when she still felt insecure, of course. Trauma doesn't magically disappear, but now she knew she wasn't alone, that her pain was heard, welcomed, and transformed into something greater, and that made all the difference. She was honored at school, not for what she suffered, but for her courage. They gave her a symbolic medal and a drawing made by the other children. It was a bridge, and on the bridge, her name. The principal said, "Sophie built a bridge between fear and courage." I cried, standing, watching my daughter applauded by an entire school. After the ceremony, a mother came up to me and said, "I doubted you, and today I want to apologize." I held her hand and said, "Thank you. It's never too late to start listening." Because it's not about being right or wrong. It's about growing, learning, and being humble in the face of another's pain. It's about breaking down the walls of silence, even when it costs dearly. Sophie kept the medal in a special box, and that night she told me, "If someone ever isn't believed, I want to be there for them." Her courage became a mission. What was pain became purpose. And I, as a mother, learned the greatest lesson of my life. When a child speaks, the world needs to stop and listen. Today, looking back, I see that everything could have been different, if only someone had listened sooner. If I, my parents, and the adults around me had looked for the signs, but we didn't. And yet my daughter had the strength to keep going, to speak out, to insist. She taught me more about courage than any book, course, or life experience. The pain we experience isn't pretty, but it doesn't have to be in vain. It's become a tool. It's become a story told in schools, lectures, and conversation circles. It's become a standard of protocol. And most importantly, it's become a liberation for other children. Because a child who sees another being heard understands that their voice has value too. My parents, over time, also changed. They apologized. They began to listen more. Their relationship with Sophie was rebuilt, brick by brick, with patience. She herself said one day, "Grandma listened to my entire story without interrupting." I smiled. Because even the hardest hearts can learn. All it takes is willingness and humility. Today, when I go to sleep, I still find myself thinking about the first time she said, "Do you believe me?" And I remember how long it took me to respond properly. But I also remember every step we took afterward, every drawing, every tear, every breakthrough. And I understand that it's never too late to do the right thing. It's never too late to be a real mother. Sophie continues to grow. Today she writes her own stories, and I continue to be her support, her listening ear, her home. Because there is no safer place for a child than the watchful eyes of those who love them. And if one day you hear a whispered cry for help, don't ignore it, because the silence you break can save a life. If you've listened to this story all the way through, it means there's something inside you that cares, and that's already the beginning of change. So share this video now with as many people as you can, on WhatsApp, social media, wherever you go. Subscribe to the channel to follow other stories that need to be told, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'll read each one with care. This story is real, and it could be the story of someone close to you. May we learn together to truly listen, always.